continuing where I left off. Chapter 11. The Countess was so tired from all the visitors that she gave orders to admit no more, but the hall porter was told to be sure to invite to dinner all who came to congratulate them. The Countess was longing to have a tete-a-tete with the friend of her childhood, Princess Anna Mikhailovna, whom she had not properly seen since her return from Petersburg. Anna Mikhailovna, with her plaintive but amiable expression, drew her chair closer to the Countess's easy chair. "I'll be absolutely frank with you," said Anna Mikhailovna. "There are not many of us old friends left. That's why I cherish your friendship." Anna Mikhailovna looked at Vera and paused. The Countess pressed her friend's hand. "Vera," she said to her elder daughter, who clearly was not her favorite, "how is it you haven't the least understanding? Don't you see that you are not wanted here? Go along to the girls, or—" The handsome Vera smiled disdainfully, but did not seem to be at all hurt. "If you had told me sooner, Mamma, I should have gone at once," she replied, and got up to go to her own room. As she paused through the sitting room, she noticed two couples, a pair in each window. She stopped, smiling scornfully. Sonia was sitting close to Nikolai, who was copying some poetry for her, the first he had ever written. Boris and Natasha, in the other window, stopped talking as soon as Vera came into the room. Sonia and Natasha looked at Vera with guilty, happy faces. It was both touching and amusing to see these little girls in love, but the sight of them seemed to arouse no such feelings in Vera. "How many times have I asked you not to take my things? You have a room of your own," she said, taking the inkwell from Nikolai. Just a minute, he said, dipping his pen into the ink. "You've always managed to do things at the wrong time," said Vera. "The way you came running into the drawing room made everyone feel ashamed of you." Despite the fact that what she said was quite true, or perhaps because of it, no one replied, but all four exchanged glances. Vera lingered in the room, the inkwell in her hand. "And at your age, what secrets can there be between Natasha and Boris, or between you two? It's nothing but foolishness. And what does it matter to you?" "Vera," Natasha interceded in a gentle voice. "That day she seemed to be kinder and more loving than usual to everyone." "It's so silly," said Vera. "I'm ashamed of you. Secrets indeed. Everyone has secrets of his own." "We don't interfere with you and Berg," said Natasha heatedly. "I should think not," said Vera, "since there is never anything wrong in what I do. But I'm going to tell Mama how you behave with Boris." "Natalia Ilichiniana behaves very well with me," said Boris. "I have nothing to complain of." "Don't, Boris. You're such a diplomat." The word diplomat was much in vogue among the children, in the special sense they attached to the word. "It's really very tiresome," said Natasha, but her voice trembling with mortification. "Why does she pick on me?" Then she turned to Vera and said, "You'll never understand, because you've never loved anyone. You have no heart. You're nothing but a Madame de Jeunesse." This nickname bestowed on Vera by Nikolai was considered most insulting. "And your greatest pleasure is making trouble for other people. You can flirt with Berg as much as you please," he finished in great haste. "Well, at least I'm not likely to run after a young man before visitors." "Now she's done what she wanted to," put in Nikolai. "She said something disagreeable to everyone and upset them. Let's go to the nursery." All four, like a flock of scared birds, got up and left the room. "The disagreeable things were said to me," retorted Vera. "I said nothing unpleasant to anyone." Madame de Jeunesse Madame de Genlis, cried the laughing voices through the door. The handsome Vera, having produced an irritating and disagreeable effect on everyone, smiled, apparently unmoved by what had been said to her, then went to the mirror and arranged her hair and scarf. Gazing at her own beautiful face seemed to make her even colder and more imperturbable. The conversation in the drawing-room was still going on. "Ah, my dear," said the Countess, "my life is no bed of roses either. Do you think I don't see that at the rate we are living, our means won't last long? It's that club, and all his kindness. And even when we stay in the country, do you think we get any rest? Theatricals, hunting, and heaven knows what. But why talk about me? Now tell me how you managed everything. I often wonder at you, Annette, how you at your age can go flying off alone in a carriage to Moscow or Petersburg to see all those ministers and important people and know how to deal with them. It's just amazing. Well, how did you arrange it?" "That's something I couldn't possibly do." "Ah, my darling," Anna Mikhailova replied, "God grant you may never know what it is to be left a widow with no resources, and with a son you worship and adore. You learn everything then. You continue with a certain pride. My lawsuit taught me a great deal. Now, when I went to see one of those bigwigs, I wrote a note. Princess so-and-so desires an interview with so-and-so. Then I take a cab and go myself, 2, 3, even 4 times, till I get what I want, and I don't care what they may think of me." "But tell me, whom do you see about Varenka?" asked the Countess. "Here your son is already an officer in the Guards, while Nikoloshka is going as a cadet. There is no one to take all that trouble for him. To whom did you apply?" "Prince Vasily. He was very kind. He immediately agreed to do everything, and put the matter before the Emperor," said Princess Anna Mikhailova with enthusiasm, quite forgetting all the humiliation she had gone through to gain her end. "Has Prince Vasily aged much?" asked the Countess. "I haven't seen him since our theatricals at the Rumyanetsvs. I expect he's forgotten me. He was very attentive to me in those days," she recalled with a smile. "He's just the same," replied Anna Mikhailova, unsparing of his kindness. "His position has not turned his head. I am sorry there is so little I can do for you, Princess," he said to me. "I am at your command." "Yes, he is a fine man and a wonderful relation. Nathalie, you know my love for my son. There isn't anything I wouldn't do for his happiness. But my affairs are in such a bad way," continued Anna Mikhailova sadly, lowering her voice, "that I am now in the dreadful position. My wretched lawsuit has eaten up everything, and it makes no progress. I have nothing, would you believe it? Literally not a 10-kopek piece, and I don't know how I am going to get Boris's outfit." She took out her handkerchief and began to cry. "I need 500 rubles, and all I have is 25-ruble notes. I am in such a state. Now my only hope is to Count Kirill Valerimovich Besukov. If he is unwilling to help his godson, you know he is Boryar's godfather, and allow him something for his support, all my efforts will have been in vain. I shall have absolutely no way of equipping him." The Countess, moved to tears, pondered in silence. "I often think, though perhaps it's wrong of me," said the Princess, "I often think here Count Kirill Valerimovich Besukov lives all alone, with that enormous fortune. And what is he living for? Life is a burden to him, and Boryar is just beginning to live." "He will surely leave something to Boris," said the Countess. "God knows, chère amie, these rich grandees are so selfish. All the same, I shall take Boris and go to see him at once, and I shall tell him straight out how things stand. When my son's fate is at stake, people may think what they will of me. It's really all the same to me." The Princess stood up. "It's now 2 o'clock, and you dine at 4. There will be just time. And with the business-like air of a Petersburg lady who knows how to make the most of her time, Anna Mikhailovna sent for her son and went into the hall with him. "Goodbye, my darling," she said to the Countess, who accompanied her to the door. "Wish me good luck," she added in a whisper so that her son should not hear. "Are you going to Count Kirill Valimirich's Masheya?" asked the Count, coming into the hall from the dining room. "If he's better, ask Pierre to come and dine with us. He's been here before, you know. Used to come and dance with the children. Be sure to invite him, Masheya. Now we shall see how Taras will distinguish himself today. He says Count Orlov never gave a dinner such as we're having." Chapter 12. "Mon cher Boris," said Princess Anna Mikhailovna to her son, as Countess Rostova's carriage, in which they were seated, drove along the straw-covered street and into the vast courtyard of Count Kirill Valimirich Besukov's house. "Mon cher Boris," said the mother, drawing her hand from beneath her old mantle, and with a timid, affectionate gesture, laying it on her son's arm, "be gracious and attentive to him. Count Kirill Valimirich is, after all, your godfather, and your future depends on him. Remember this, mon cher, and be charming as you so well know how to be." "If I thought that anything other than humiliation would come of it," replied her son coldly. "However, I promise, and I'll do it for your sake." Although the hall porter saw that someone's carriage was standing at the entrance, after scrutinizing the mother and son and casting a knowing glance at the lady's well-worn mantle, they had walked straight the glass porch between the two rows of statues and niche without asking to be announced. He inquired whom they wished to see, the Count or the Princess, and learning that it was the Count, said that His Excellency was worse today and His Excellency was not receiving anyone. "We may as well go," said the son in French. "Mon cher," exclaimed the mother in an imploring tone, again laying her hand on his arm as if that touch might soothe or rouse him. Boris said no more, but without taking off his overcoat looked inquiringly at his mother. "My friend," said Anna Mikhailovna, addressing the hall porter in a gentle voice, "I know that Count Kirill Valimirich is very ill. That's why I've come. I am a relative. I shall not disturb him, my friend. I need only see Prince Vasily Sergeyevich. He is staying here, is he not? Please announce me." The hall porter, after suddenly pulling a bell cord that rang upstairs, turned away. "Princess Drupskaya to see Prince Vasily Sergeyevich," he called to a footman in knee breeches, low shoes, and a swallow-tail coat, who ran down the stairs and looked over the landing. The mother smoothed the folds of her dyed silk dress, looked at herself in the full-length Venetian mirror on the wall, and briskly ascended the carpeted staircase in her down-at-the-heel shoes. "Mon cher, remember your promise," she said to her son with another encouraging pat on the arm. The son coolly followed her, her eyes lowered. They entered a large hall from which one of the doors led to the apartment occupied by Prince Vasily. Just as the mother and son reached the middle of the hall and were about to ask their way of an elderly footman who sprang up when they entered, the bronze handle of one of the doors turned, and Prince Vasily, wearing a velvet coat with a single star on his breast, as with his custom when at home, came out accompanying a handsome dark-haired man. This was the celebrated Petersburg physician Lorraine. "Then it is certain," asked the prince. "Mon prince, irea humanist must," he replied, the doctor rolling his R's and pronouncing the Latin words with a fresh accent. Very well," seeing Anna Mikhailovna and her son. Prince Vasily dismissed the doctor with a bow and went to them in silence, a look of inquiry on his face. The son noticed that his mother's eyes took on an expression of deep sorrow, and he smiled slightly. "Ah, what sad circumstances bring us together this time, Prince, and how is our dear patient?" she asked, apparently oblivious of the cold, insulting look fixed on her. Prince Vasily turned his puzzled, questioning gaze from the mother to the son. Boris bowed politely, without acknowledging the bow. Prince Vasily turned to Anna Mikhailovna and answered her question with a movement of his head and lips that indicated that there was very little hope for the patient. "Is it possible?" exclaimed Anna Mikhailovna. "Or how?" Dreadful. It is awful to think. This is my son, she added, indicating Boris. He wanted to thank himself. Boris again bowed politely. Believe me, Prince, a mother's heart will never forget what you have done for us. I am glad I was able to do you a service, my dear Anna Mikhailovna, said Prince Vasily, fingering his jabot and displaying in both his tone and manner to Anna Mikhailovna, who was now under obligation to him, an air of much greater importance here in Moscow than at Anna Scherer's soiree in Petersburg. Try to serve well and prove yourself worthy, he added, sternly to Boris. I am glad. Are you here on leave? He interrogated in his usual impassive tone. I am waiting for orders to join my new regiment, Your Excellency, said Boris, showing neither chagrin at the prince's sharp tone nor desire to enter into conversation, but speaking with such composure and respect that the prince gave him a searching look. You are living with your mother? I am staying at Countess Rostov's, said Boris again, adding, Your Excellency. That is the Ilya Rostov who married Natalie Shensina, said Anna Mikhailovna. I know, said Prince Vasily in his usual monotone. I have never been able to understand, he added in French, how Natalie ever made up her mind to marry that unlicked cub. A completely absurd and stupid man, and a gambler too, from what I hear. But such a kind man, mon prince, observed Anna Mikhailovna with a pathetic smile, as if she knew quite well that Count Rostov merited this censure, but even so begged him not to be too hard on the old man. What do the doctors say? She asked after a pause, her plaintive face again expressing deep sorrow. They give very little hope, said the prince, and I wanted so much to thank Uncle once more for all his kindness to me and to Borya. He is his godson, you know, she added in a tone implying that this piece of information was bound to afford Prince Vasily the utmost delight. Prince Vasily frowned and grew thoughtful. Anna Mikhailovna detected his fear of finding in her a rival heir for Count Beskov's fortune. She hastened to reassure him. If it were not for my sincere love and devotion to Uncle, she said, uttering the last word with particular assurance and unconcern, I know his character, noble, upright, but you see, he has only the princesses with him, and they are so young. She lowered her head and added in a whisper, Has he fulfilled his final duties, Prince? How precious are these last moments? It can make things no worse, you see, and he must be prepared if he is so ill. We women, Prince, she smiled tenderly, always know how to say these things. I absolutely must see him, regardless of how painful it is for me, but then I am used to suffering. The prince evidently understood, just as he has understood at Anna Scherer's, that to get rid of Anna Mikhailovna was no easy matter. Wouldn't such an interview be too trying for him, Anna Mikhailovna? He asked. Let us wait till evening. The doctors have predicted a crisis. But at a time like this, it is impossible to wait, Prince. Think, the salvation of his soul is at stake. Ah, it is awful. The duties of a Christian. A door to the inner rooms opened, and one of the princesses, the count's niece, entered with a cold, forbidding look on her face. Her long waist was strikingly out of proportion to the length of her legs. Prince Vasily turned to her. Well, how is she? Still the same. What can you expect with this noise? Said the princess, looking at Anna Mikhailovna as if she were a stranger. Ah, ma chère, I didn't recognize you, said Anna Mikhailovna, smiling delightedly as she ambled up to the count's niece. I have come to place myself at your disposal, to help you nurse my uncle. I can imagine what you have gone through, she added, turning up her eyes sympathetically. The princess made no reply, and without so much as a smile, promptly left the room. The position conquered, Anna Mikhailovna took off her gloves, entrenched herself in an easy chair, and invited Prince Vasily to sit down beside her. Boris, she said to her son with a smile, I'm going in to the Count to Uncle, so you can go alone to Pierre, my dear, and while you're there, don't forget to give him the Rostov's invitation. They have asked him to dinner, she said to the prince. I don't suppose he can go. On the contrary, retorted to the prince, who was clearly out of humor. I shall be very pleased to have you take that young man off my hands. He doesn't stir from here, and the Count has not once asked to see him, and the prince shrugged his shoulders. A footman conducted Boris downstairs and up another staircase to Patriarch Karvelich. Chapter 13. On the top of his failures to settle on a career in Petersburg, Pierre had indeed been exiled to Moscow for his riotous conduct. The story told that Countess Rostanov's quite true. Pierre had taken part in tying the policeman to the bear. He had now been in Moscow for several days, staying, as usual, at his father's house, though he assumed that the story would already be known in Moscow, and that the ladies surrounding his father, who at best were never favorably disposed toward him, would have taken advantage of the occasion to provoke the Count. He went straight to his father's rooms the day he arrived. Entering the drawing room where the princesses were generally to be found, he greeted the ladies, two of whom were seated at embroidery frames, while the third read aloud. The eldest, an immaculate, long-waisted, stern-looking maiden, the one who had come out to Anna Mikhailovna, was reading. The two younger ones, both rosy and pretty, and differing from each other only in that one had a mole on her lip, which made her much prettier, were embroidering. Pierre was received as if he were a ghost or a leaper. The eldest princess stopped reading and stared at him aghast. The second assumed an identical expression, while the youngest, the one with the mole, who was of a merry, fun-loving disposition, bent over her embroidery frame to hide a smile, invoked no doubt by the amusing scene she foresaw. Scarcely able to keep from laughing, she drew the wool through the canvas, bending low as if trying to make out the pattern. "Bonjour, ma cousine," said Pierre. "Don't you know me? I know you only too well. How is that, Count? Can I see him?" asked Pierre, awkwardly as always, but unabashed. "The Count is suffering both physically and morally, and it turns out that you have done your best to add to his moral suffering." "Can I see the Count?" Pierre repeated. If you wish to kill him outright, you can see him. Olga, go and see if Uncle's broth is ready. It will soon be time for it," she added, giving Pierre to understand that whereas they were busy alleviating his father's suffering, he appeared to be occupied only in upsetting him. Olga went out. After standing and looking at the sisters for a moment, Pierre bowed and said, "Then I'll go to my rooms. You will let me know when I can see him." He went out, followed by a low, ringing laughter of the sister with the mole. The next day, Prince Vasily arrived and took up residence in the Count's house. He sent for Pierre and said to him, "My dear boy, if you conduct yourself here as you did in Petersburg, you will come to a bad end. That's all I have to say to you. The Count is very ill. Very, very ill. It is utterly impossible for you to see him." Since then, Pierre had been left undisturbed and had spent all his time upstairs in his rooms. When Boris appeared at his door, Pierre was pacing up and down, occasionally stopping in a corner to make a menacing gesture at the wall as if running a sword through an invisible enemy, glaring over his spectacles, and again pacing up and down, all the while muttering indistinctly, shrugging his shoulders and gesticulating. "England is done for," he mumbled, scowling and pointing a finger at someone unseen. "Pitt, as a traitor to the state and to the rights of nations, is condemned to—" But before he could conclude Pitt's sentence, Pierre, who at the moment imagined he was Napoleon, and had just effected a perilous crossing of the English Channel and the conquest of London, saw a handsome, well-built young officer entering his room. Pierre came to a standstill. He had last seen Boris as a boy of 14, and though he had no recollection of him, he greeted him in his usual spontaneous, hearty way, with a friendly smile and a hand-clasp. "Do you remember me?" asked Boris coolly, with a pleasant smile. "I've come with my mother to see the Count, but it seems he is not at all well." "Yes, so it seems, and people keep disturbing him," said Pierre, trying to remember who this young man was. Boris felt that Pierre did not recognize him, but considered him unnecessary to introduce himself, and without the least embarrassment looked him straight in the eyes. Count Rostov invites you to come to dinner today, he said after a rather long and for Pierre uncomfortable pause. Ah, Count Rostov, exclaimed Pierre with delight. Then you are his son Ilya, and to think that I didn't recognize you at first. Do you remember how we drove into the Sparrow Hills with Madame Jacquot a long time ago? You are mistaken, said Boris deliberately, and with an arrogant and slightly contemptuous smile. I am Boris, the son of Princess Anna Mikhailovna Drobajevskaya. Rostov Sr. Ilya. The son is Nikolai, and I have never known any Madame Jacquot. Pierre shook his head and waved his arms as if warding off a swarm of flies or bees. Oh, what am I thinking of? I am all mixed up. So many relatives in Moscow. You are Boris. Yes, now we know where we are. Well, what do you think of the Brolug expedition? It's going to be bad for the English, don't you think? If Napoleon gets across the Channel, I believe the expedition is quite feasible, if only Villeneuve doesn't bungle it. Boris knew nothing about the Boulogne expedition. He did not read the newspapers, and was hearing of Villeneuve for the first time. Here in Moscow we are more occupied with dinner parties and scandal than with politics, he said in his cool, mocking tone. I know nothing and think nothing of all this. Moscow busies itself chiefly with gossip, he continued. Just now they are talking about you and the Count. Pierre smiled good-naturedly, as if fearing that his companion might say something he would regret. But Boris spoke distinctively, dryly, and unequivocally, looking straight into Pierre's eyes. In Moscow they have nothing to do but gossip, he went on. Everyone is busy wondering whom the Count will leave his fortune to, though he may of course outlive us all, and I sincerely hope he will. But all this is too bad, Pierre broke in. Really too bad. Pierre kept fearing that his officer had inadvertently embarked on a conversation that would prove embarrassing to himself. And it must appear to you, said Boris, flushing slightly, but not altering his tone of manner, it must appear to you that everyone is concerned only with getting something from a rich man. So it does, thought Pierre. But I just want to tell you, to avoid any misunderstanding, that you are quite mistaken if you rank me and my mother among these people. We are very poor, but, speaking for myself, there is one thing I can say. For the very reason that your father is rich, I do not regard myself as a relative of his, and neither I nor my mother would ever ask or ever take anything for him. Pierre did not comprehend this at once, but when he did, he jumped up from the sofa, caught Boris by the wrist in his impulsive, clumsy way, and, blushing far more than Boris, began to speak with a feeling compounded of shame and vexation. Well, this is strange. Do you suppose I... But who would ever think... I know very well. Again Boris interrupted him. I am glad I have spoken plainly. You will forgive me if this is unpleasant for you, he said, putting Pierre at ease instead of being put at ease by him. And I hope I have not offended you. I make it a rule always to speak frankly. Well, what answer am I to give them? Will you come to dinner at the Rostovs? And having acquitted himself of an onerous duty and extricated himself from an awkward position by putting someone else in one, Boris became quite pleasant again. But listen, said Pierre, remaining his composure. You're an amazing fellow. What you have just said is good, very good. Of course, you don't know me. We haven't seen each other for a long time, not since we were children. You might very well think that I understand perfectly. I couldn't have done it myself. I haven't the courage, but it's splendid. I am very happy to have made your acquaintance. Strange, he added, after pausing and smiling, that you should have thought that of me. He began to laugh. Well, what of it? I hope we shall become better acquainted. He presses Boris's hand. Do you know I have not once been in to see the Count? He hasn't sent for me. I am sorry for him as a man, but what can I do? So you think Napoleon will succeed in getting an army across? Asked Boris with a smile. Pierre realized that he wanted to change the subject, and being of the same mind, commenced explaining the pros and cons of the balloon expedition. A footman came to summon Boris. The princess was going. Pierre promised to come to dinner in order to get better acquainted with Boris, and peering over his spectacles with a friendly look straight into his eyes, he firmly shook his hands. When Boris had gone, Pierre again paced the room for some time, no longer tilting at imaginary foes, but smiling at the recollection of that pleasant, intelligent, resolute young man. As often happens in youth, especially when one leads a lonely life, he felt a countable tenderness for the young man, and resolved to become friends with him without fail. Prince Vasily saw the princess off. She held her handkerchief to her eyes, and her face was mournful. "It's dreadful, dreadful," she said, "but I shall do my duty at all costs. I'll come and spend the night. He must not be left like this. Every minute is precious. I cannot understand why the princess has delayed. May God help him to find the way to prepare him. Adieu, my prince. May the good Lord sustain you. Adieu, my bonne," answered the prince, turning from her. "Oh, he is in a dreadful state," the mother said to her son, when they were again seated in the carriage. "He hardly recognizes anyone." "I don't understand, mamma." "What is his attitude to Pierre?" asked the son. "The will, my dear, will tell everything, and our fate too depends on it. But what makes you think he will leave us anything?" "Ah, my dear, he is so rich, and we are so poor." "But that's hardly a sufficient reason, mamma." "Oh, my God, how ill he is," exclaimed the mother. Chapter 14. After Anna Mikhailovna had driven off with her son to Count Kirill Vladimirovich Beskov's Countess Rostov's, sat alone for a long time, her handkerchief pressed to her eyes. At last she rang. "What is the matter with you, my dear?" she said crossly to the maid, who had kept her waiting a few minutes. "If you don't wish to serve me, I'll put you to other work." Upset by her friend's misfortune and humiliating poverty, the Countess was out of sorts, and expressed it, as always, by addressing her maid rather formally as "my dear." "I'm sorry, ma'am," said the maid. "Ask the Count to come here." The Count came waddling in, and approached his wife with a slightly guilty look as usual. "Well, little Countess, what a soirée of Hazelha Kamed we shall have, ma chère. I tasted it. The 1,000 rubles I paid for Taros was well spent. He's worth it." He sat down by his wife, jauntily resting his elbows on his knees, and rumpled his grey hair. "What can I do for you, little Countess?" "Well, you see, my dear, now. What have you got on yourself?" she asked, pointing to his waistcoat. "It's the soirée, I expect," she added, smiling. "You see, Count, I want some money." Her face became sad. "Ah, little Countess," he said, and began fumbling for his pocketbook. "I want a great deal, Count. I need 500 rubles." And taking her cambric handkerchief, she rubbed her husband's waistcoat. "This minute, this very minute. Hey, who's there?" he called in a tone of a man who's confident that whatsoever he calls will come running to obey his command. "Send Meteka to me." Meteka, a nobleman's son, who had been brought up in the Count's house and now managed all his affairs, came quietly into the room. "Now, here's what I want, my dear boy," said the Count to the deferential young man who had entered. "Bring me," he thought for a moment, "yes, 700 rubles, yes. And mind you, don't bring me such torn, dirty notes as last time, but nice ones for the Countess." "Yes, Metenka, clean ones, please," said the Countess with a melancholy sigh. "When does your Excellency require them?" asked Metenka. "I am obliged to inform you that. However, don't worry," he added, observing that the Count was beginning to breathe rapidly and heavily, which was always a sign of impending anger. "It just slipped my mind that. Do you wish to have it brought at once?" "Yes, yes, to be sure. Bring it now. Give it to the Countess. What a treasure that Metenka is," the Count added with a smile when the young man had gone. "Nothing is ever impossible. That's something I can't stand. Everything is possible." "Ah, money, Count, money. How much sorrow it causes in the world," said the Countess. "But I am in very great need of this money. My little Countess, you are a notorious spendthrift," declared the Count, and after kissing his wife's hand, he went back to his study. When Anna Mikhailovna returned from Count Beskov's money, The money, all in brand new notes, was lying under a handkerchief on the Countess' little table, and she noticed that her friend was troubled about something. "Well, how is he, my dear?" inquired the Countess. "Oh, what a dreadful state he is in. One wouldn't recognize him. He is so ill, so ill. I spent only a moment with him, and hardly said a word. Annette, for God's sake, don't refuse me." The Countess broke in, and with a blush that looked very odd on her thin, dignified, elderly face, she took the money from under her handkerchief. Instantly perceiving her intention, Anna Mikhailova was ready to bend down and embrace the Countess at the appropriate moment. "This is for Boris, for me, for his uniform." Anna Mikhailova's arms were around her, and she was weeping. The Countess wept too. They wept because they were friends, because they were both kind-hearted, because having been friends from childhood, they should now be concerned with anything so base as money, and because their youth was over. But their tears gave them pleasure. Chapter 15. Countess Rostova, with her daughters and a large number of guests, were seated in the drawing room. The Count had taken the gentlemen to his study, where they were invited to enjoy his choice collection of Turkish pipes. From time to time he went out and inquired, "Hasn't she come yet?" They were waiting for Marya Dipchoneva Akhmosfova, known in society as less terrible dragon, a lady celebrated not for her wealth or distinction, but for her straightforward speech and the frank simplicity of her manners. Marya Dipchoneva was known to the imperial family as well to all Moscow and Petersburg, and both cities wondered at her, laughed up their sleeves at her rudeness, and told anecdotes about her. Nevertheless, all without exception feared and respected her. In the smoke-filled study, the talk was of the recent manifesto declaring war and the recruiting. No one had read the manifesto, but everyone knew about it. The Count sat on an ottoman between two guests who were smoking and talking. While doing neither himself, he watched them with undisguised pleasure, turning his head from side to side, listening to the conversation of the two men he had set against each other. One of them was a clean-shaven civilian with a thin, wrinkled, bilious face, who, though past middle age, was dressed like the most fashionable young man. He sat with his feet on the ottoman as though quite at home, and having stuck the amber mouthpiece of the pipe into the side of his mouth, screwed up his eyes and drew on the pipe spasmodically. This was Shinshin, an old bachelor and cousin of the Countess, a man with a venomous tongue, according to the talk in the drawing rooms of Moscow. He was apparently condescending to his companion, a fresh, rosy officer of the guards, irreproachably scrubbed, brushed, and buttoned up, who held the amber mouthpiece of his pipe in the middle of his handsome mouth, his red lips gently drawing in the smoke and expelling it in little rings. This was Lieutenant Berg, an officer of the Semyonovsky regiment, whom Boris was to travel to join his regiment, and about whom Natasha had taunted her elder sister Vera, calling him her fiancé. The Count sat between them, listening attentively. His favorite occupation, aside from playing Boston, a game of which he was exceedingly fond, was that of listener, especially when he succeeded in pitting two valuable conversations against each other. "So that's how it is, brother Mon Treshanabo Afans Kalovich," said Shinshin with a snigger, mingling the most ordinary Russian expression with courtly French phrases, which was peculiarly of his speech. "Vas Countess, vas federentes celulet, going to make a profit out of your company." "Not at all, Paya Nalovich. I only wish to demonstrate that it is far less profitable to be in the cavalry than in the infantry. Now, if you will consider my position, Pyotr Nikolaevich." Berg always spoke quietly, politely, and very precisely. His conversation invariably related to himself, and as soon as the talk turned on any topic not directly relating to him, he maintained a serene silence. He could remain silent for hours at a time without feeling or causing others to feel the least awkwardness. But as soon as the conversation concerned him personally, he commenced talking loquaciously and with visible satisfaction. "Consider my position, Pyotr Nikolaevich. If I were in the cavalry, I should receive no more than 200 rubles every 4 months, even with the rank of lieutenant. As it is, I get 230, he said, looking from Shinshin to the Count with an affable, delighted smile, as if it was obvious to him that his success most inevitably constituted the chief aim and desire of everyone else. Besides which, Pyotr Nikolaevich, by transferring to the Guards, I shall be where I can be noticed, Berg continued, and vacancies occur more frequently in the Foot Guards. Then just think what can be done with 230 rubles. I managed to put a little aside and even send something to my father, he went on, blowing a smoke ring. La balance, yes, a German can skin a flint to save a kopeck, as the proverb goes, sustained Shinshin, shifting the mouthpiece of the pipe to the other side of his mouth and winking at the Count. The Count roared with laughter. When they saw that it was Shinshin who was talking, the other guests gathered around to listen. Berg, oblivious both to raillery and to indifference, proceeded to explain how by transferring to the Guards he already gained a step on his old comrades in the cadet corps, that in wartime the company commander might be killed, and he as senior officer might easily succeed him, how he was liked by everyone in the regiment, and how pleased his dear papa was with him. Berg clearly enjoyed recounting all this, and it probably never occurred to him that people might have other interests. But he was so likable, so serious about everything he said, and the ingenuousness of his youthful egotism was so obvious that he disarmed his listeners. Well, my boy, you'll go along wherever you go, cavalry or infantry, that I predict for you. And said Shinshin, removing his feet from the ottoman and giving Berg a pat on the shoulder. Berg smiled happily. The Count led his guest back to the drawing room. The time had come, as always, before a large dinner party, when the assembled guests, expecting to be summoned to the Havwerdo's table, avoid starting any long conversations, yet think it necessary to move about and talk in order to show that they are not in the least impatient to get the table. The host and hostess kept looking toward the door and occasionally exchanging glances from which the guests tried to conjecture who or what they are waiting for, an important relative who is late or a dish that is not yet ready. Pierre arrived just before dinner and awkwardly seated himself on the first chair he came across, right in the middle of the drawing room, where he blocked everyone's way. The Countess tried to make him talk, but he kept looking around the room, naively peering through his spectacles as if searching for someone, and answered all her questions in monosyllables. He was being difficult, and was the only person unaware of it. Most of the guests, knowing of the incident with the bear, looked with curiosity at this big, stout, meat-looking man, and wondered how one so assuming and lethargic could have played such a trick on a policeman. You arrived only recently? The Countess asked him. Oi, madame, he answered, gazing about him. You have not yet seen my husband. Non, madame, he replied with an appropriate smile. I believe you were in Paris not long ago. It's very interesting, I suppose. Very interesting. The Countess exchanged glances with Anna Mikhailovna. Perceiving that she was being asked to entertain the young man, Anna Mikhailovna sat down beside him and commenced talking about his father, but he answered her as he had the Countess in monosyllables. The other guests were all conversing among themselves. The Rasmuskus, it was charming. You are most kind, Countess Apreskina, was heard on all sides. The Countess got up and went into the hall. Marya Jepchemieva, she was heard to say. Herself, came the answer in the gruff female voice, whereupon Marya Jepchemieva appeared in the room. All the young ladies, and even the married women, except the very eldest, stood up. Marya Jepchemieva stopped in the doorway, tall and stout, her 50-year-old head with its gray curls held high. She stood serving the guests and unhurriedly arranging her wide sleeves as if she were rolling them up. Marya Jepchemieva also spoke in Russian. And with that, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for watching. Please give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Leave a comment below, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.